What's a horrifying/creepy experience you have lived through? Serious. When I was maybe 19 or 20, I nearly got run off the road on my way home from work one night. No actual accident. But it shook me up, so I pulled off on the shoulder to calm down before continuing to drive. A windowless van pulled up behind me and a man got out and approached my car. He asked if I was okay. And I told him I was fine. Just gathering myself after a scare. He offered for me to wait in the van with his wife and kids. He insisted multiple times that I get in his van. Luckily my door was already locked and I had only cracked the window to speak with him. Since he parked his van right behind me and I could see in my rear view there were no visible passengers in his van. I was once at my girlfriend's townhouse and they had a backyard with a shared fence with a family or group of families. It was dark night. But one of those nights when the light of the town reflects off of the clouds, so it's eerily light out. The fence between the townhome and the family house was old and worn out, so you could see through the gaps if you really focused. We heard a blood-curdling scream, "Noo!" followed by an immediate soul-crushing inhale. There was probably 50 feet between the glass sliding door we were at and the fence. They had their floodlights on. And it illuminated the silhouettes of the parents crying. Peering through the fence 50 feet away, you could see a body swaying from the tree. Their son had hung himself and discovered it in the dead of night when their dog ran out to the backyard and activated the floodlights. We could only see through the small gaps in the fence and the shadows of the family experiencing it in real time. Still gives me chills every time I think about it. One night of college. I heard a woman screaming for help. I looked out my window and saw her right next to the street. Keep in mind this is a popular college town and the street was busy and there didn't seem to be anything immediately attacking or endangering her. After a few minutes I was about to go down when a car pulled up and 3 guys got out. I could overhear the convo since it was right out of my bedroom, but she said no one was paying attention and they should try some other apartment. They all jumped in and drove off. A month later an apartment got broken into and 4 people were caught. 1 woman and 3 men. Apparently she was in the house and left the door unlocked, and the men then came in and robbed the place. When I was 19 I was 7 months pregnant with my oldest daughter. I still lived with my parents and came home after work around 11:30 p.m. I usually checked that the vehicles were locked before going inside. But this night I was overcome with a sense of immense fear. I wouldn't even look towards my parents' vehicles and hurried into the house. 20 minutes later a guy is knocking on our door telling us that my parents' SUV was on fire and to get out of the house. Saving our lives, and we called 911. There was a serial arsonist on the loose in our town, and when he was caught and he confessed, he admitted to watching me come home that night and how he was preparing to hurt me in case I had caught him, but I never looked over his direction as he was sitting in my parents' SUV when I had arrived home. It took years before I was able to be out at night alone. I was driving home from Target at around 8 p.m. at night and got the feeling the car behind me was following me. I started taking a very weird, circuitous way and they stayed behind tailgating. But close enough to not lose me. Finally, they turned and I breathed a sigh of relief. I turned on a side street. Saw an idling car with its lights off. And the headlights came on and they started following me again. I was freaking out and drove as fast as I safely could to the small town police station. When they saw me turn into the parking lot, they sped off. I sat there until my adrenaline calmed down a bit. And then I drove home and promptly burst into tears. Closest I've ever come to living out a horror movie. After getting evicted from our apartment, my sister and I lived in a station wagon with our mom for almost a month. One night, we were parked in a lot kind of hidden behind some dumpsters. It was just my sister and me, trying to sleep when we woke up to someone tapping on the window. It was an old man with a scraggly beard and these wet lesions all over his face. He smiled at us and told us in this raspy voice, "Hey! Roll down the window." In the dim light from the street lamp, he looked like a demon pressing his face against the window glass. We shook our heads and held each other as he went around the station wagon checking each door to see if it would open. Eventually, he came back to the rear and this time he wasn't smiling but looking really angry and demented. He started slamming on the back window and telling us to open the peeping window, "You peeping cunts." I remember being terrified that he was going to break the glass with his fists. He suddenly stopped and walked away when an SUV pulled in and shone its headlights on him. I don't know if it was a cop or a security guard or just someone driving by. But it was enough to scare him away. My sister and I jumped out of the car as the SUV pulled away. We went to the laundromat and sat in there for the rest of the night. I've seen a lot since I used to live in a bad part of town. But the one that really stood out was when one of the wiremen was literally burnt into a crisp. We were at the church next door, which was at the second floor and had a big window. From the back you could see the wireman doing something. But then suddenly he grabbed hold on a live wire. He tensed up, started shaking, and he couldn't let go. People tried getting him down using wooden sticks, but it only caused him to fall down, still clinging on the live wire. I didn't see anything else after him falling down, but our neighbors said his clothes were burnt off and he was literally charred and unrecognizable. When I was about 6, my parents dropped me off at this swimming lesson class. Now this was back in China over 2 decades ago. I remember that class had a lot of students. Anyways, I was scared of the water and didn't want to go in, and the teacher got frustrated and just tossed me in the deep end. To this day I remember clearly the panic I felt. The sheer fear as I choked and gauged on the pool water as I sunk lower and lower. It felt like ages before the teacher shoved a long pole into the pool for me to grab onto to pull me out. I remember the sensation of panic and edges of my vision getting dark. For several years after, I was so terrified of water going over my face that I had trouble showering and washing my hair. I had to force myself to take a deep breath, go under the water and scrub as fast as I can and step out. Every time my heart rate would go crazy and I would be on the edge of a panic attack. Anyways, it wasn't till I was in my mid-20s that this even came up during a family visit, and my grandmother told me that when Grandpa found out, he got so mad he called in favors from his army buddies, literally old revolutionary soldiers from Mao's days, to go in there with high-ranking government officials to scare the beep out of that swimming school/teacher. It's more creepy than horrifying. This was right after the mass Las Vegas shooting. I was at my sister's keeping her company. Her husband was out of town and we had her 2 young children. We were talking about the shooting and how probably a lot of people don't run away at the start of a mass shooting. B/C gunfire in real life doesn't sound like it does on TV. At that very moment, we heard this bang 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 and I thought it was someone trying to kick in her door. We took the kids to the bedroom and hit the panic button on her security system. It wasn't someone trying to kick in the door. Someone had shot through her front door. I was kidnapped by an ex. Well, I say kidnapped. It all started with severe blackmail, death threats, having people watch my house, telling me when my family were home, etc. Then he kidnapped me and kept me locked in a hotel room for 3 days. I was beaten, raped, abused, tortured. He was threatening to sell me to a Bulgarian biker gang where I was to be turned basically into their heroin junkie. He had arranged for me to be collected from the hotel the next morning. Luckily my family had reported me missing and in the early hours the police managed to find me. I saw my once chance of escape and took it. Thankfully now he is serving 23 years. I definitely learned a lot about myself in those 3 days.